Teenacity fam, welcome back to another episode where we make adolescence not just bearable, but incredible. I'm your host Adivir Kapuria, and today we're diving into the world of resilience, self-efficacy, and the power of understanding ourselves a little better. Are you ready to boost your emotional quotient, dig deeper into resilience, and embrace the wild journey of your teen years? Well, you'd better be, because we've got someone who's made it her mission to help people do just that. Our incredibly special guest today, Miss Vinati Dev, is more than just an ICF trained coach. She's practically a human compass for navigating the maze that is teenage emotions, decisions, and well, life. Vinati is not only a communication consultant, but also the co-founder of Sai Shiko, a trailblazing venture that's equipping folks of all ages with the science and practice of well-being by focusing on empowering individuals with the tools they need for self-mastery and self-management. So if you've ever felt stuck in a rut or wondered why decision-making feels like a trek up Mount Everest, grab your headphones and hunker down. We're diving into the neuroscience of why your teen brain feels like a roller coaster and how to find your true North Star amidst the chaos. And trust me, with Miss Vinati's practical wisdom, we're about to add some method to the madness. Alright, Teenacity warriors, it's time to take notes, take charge, and get enlightened. Welcome to this podcast, Miss Vinati. Hope all is going well.
All is well. Thank you, Ativir. I'm very excited to be here.
Wonderful. Great. So before we delve into my questions, I wanted to talk about my own experience with grit. A couple of years back, I went through a rough patch socially and academically. Basically, my grades started dipping and I alienated myself from my peers as well. I isolated myself to this negative space where I was not able to access my whole potential. And then one day, after receiving the results for my examinations, which did not abide by my usually high academic standards, I took a step back to look at myself. And that's where my journey with grit began. And Miss Vinti, when I was reading up about Sai Shiko, it was evident that perseverance is at the core of your philosophy as well. I had my defining experience where I found myself struggling. But what compelled you to start exploring the secrets behind how people bounce back from life?
Yeah, so no, that's a great question, Adivir. And two things. We've always looked at life in terms of what happens to people after they've gone through a shock. And what fascinated me was, what were the processes of some people that experienced shock um, and did well afterwards and were able to recover. And what was it about people that didn't recover that fast? So I was very curious on, I would say, the science behind bouncing back, right? Because I was also pretty certain that everybody has some sort of shock. In your case, it was a bad grade that kind of compelled you to rethink. So adversity is a part of life. Sometimes it gets out of hand, you get a big shock. But then the real interesting thing is, how do different brains and different people respond? Some respond pretty quick. What are the strategies they use? And I was really interested in that bit. And in the scientific literature, they call it, post-traumatic growth versus, say, post-traumatic stress disorder. So I was very interested in that. And I was very interested in using the science behind it to help young students, young folks like you, just do better, get past the tiny setbacks of life, social, academic, even health, and then move on to improve upon what's occurred. So that was it. Just experimenting and trying to learn about what it takes to bounce back faster. So that's what compelled us to work on those aspects.
I think that's wonderful. In fact, I can totally relate to this myself because I've seen in myself and so many of my peers suffer from these temporary hiccups. Some may call them setbacks, and initially they may seem like dead ends to some. To some, they may seem like opportunities for growth. And when you suffer from these setbacks, by the time you learn how to recover from them and learn how to cope with them, you've lost a lot of precious time. And time is something that's priceless, right? So it has a domino effect, and before you know it, you've dug yourself deep into a rabbit hole of underconfidence and self-doubt, and it takes a while to come out of that shell. So something I want to know is, how does our brain play a role in defining the resilience we show when we're confronted by these small hiccups or small obstacles, which are a part of the day-to-day life, especially for teenagers?
So, you already answered it in one sense, Adivir, when you said that these are temporary hiccups. So there's a lot of work been done by a gentleman called Richard Davidson on explanatory styles. And one of the key aspects of those who recover fast and faster are those that see a hiccup as temporary versus permanent. And there tends to be a thought process, a cognitive process. Remember when we were thinking about this podcast, I had mentioned to you that there are habits of thinking, feeling, and doing.
Right.
So those that feel that a setback is temporary are already halfway through because they don't see it as a general phenomena of life. They see it as I had a bad day versus I'm having a bad year. Big difference. So the cognitive processes of young people that see a setback as temporary, they're already halfway there.
Right. And I completely agree, because then that also ties in with what we were talking about earlier, that if one recognizes a problem as an opportunity to find a solution and improve on oneself, and rather than looking at it as a hurdle that one needs to find a way to cross, then that really helps the process, because the first step, recognizing the need to solve this problem for the holistic growth of yourself. So before we go on to that, I would like to backtrack a bit. We were talking about the brain, you were talking about cognitive processes.
Yeah.
And I read that our decision making control center of the brain, which is the prefrontal cortex, it
Yeah.
doesn't fully develop until you reach the age of, say, 25, 26 years old. And considering this and the fact that teenagers often grapple with these challenges regarding being hopeful and regarding believing in themselves, like you talked about self-efficacy, how do you propose that teenagers with their brains still developing, how can they turn this phase of life into an opportunity to enhance self-efficacy?
So I think what we need to focus on very early for a teenagers is to be able to take on and do more things on your own. You have to have the sort of ability to say, I can manage this on my own, whether it's setting up a timetable, whether it's even setting up the alarm for the morning, whether it's even getting yourself a cup of coffee or milk or whatever it is that you need to get. You start to have very tiny confidence measures that over time become very, very big. There's a great, I believe, is an admiral in the US Army, and he was talking about how do you have an intentional day? And he said, well, you first make your bed in the morning. Right. And it seems tiny, but it's the first sign of self efficacy, right? There's a huge amount of dopamine hit even if you accomplish a little task. So often in the morning, if I'm feeling quite overwhelmed about the 100 things I have to do, I tend to, finish reading a small piece, but I feel very accomplished because I finished it. I pay an online bill. It's a small, tiny task, but it helps me think about me being able to accomplish the bigger things. So I think with teens, if they begin to do the small things on their own, they'll be able to take on bigger and more complex challenges. And I think that's the way you develop confidence over time. Confidence is an act, it's not a thought.
I resonate with this completely again, because there's so many avenues where a teenager can apply this learning. It's not just the worry of academics or making new friends. There's simple problems teenagers face on a daily basis, and there's so much you can do by accomplishing little tasks. Like Neil Armstrong said, one little step can then amount to a great leap in due
Yeah.
time. We've talked about how this change in mindset can lead to positive results. And
Yeah.
you talked about the dopamine rush that then stimulates the brain to feel better and allow you to feel more confident. But if we could delve into exactly what is the science behind changing one's mindset to a more positive one, and how that leads to greater results in the future.
Yeah. So, big question, but let me take just the analogy from Neil Armstrong that you've mentioned, but convert it to habits, right? I was just doing a piece on transformation for our blog, and transformation is what we imagine, right? You imagine playing in the team. You imagine losing 10 kilos. You imagine getting an A when you're at B at the moment, right? And that imagination itself, Abhivir, can be very overwhelming. You're like, this is not happening, right? It's those before and after advertisements you see for weight loss. We're so stuck in the imagination that we kind of just drop the idea. I'll never make it. This is not for me. I'm not a math person. What happens is, just like the prefrontal cortex is for executive function, there is a part of our brain that's responsible for habit creation. And what you need to do is not to pull an all-nighter to get an A eventually. What you need to do is spend just a half an hour more today. What you need to do is build the habit of reviewing a math concept that was difficult for you. So you just need to have a habit of asking Abhivir about it, so because he's understood it better. You just need to make sure that you see another video about algebra or whatever it is that you didn't get. So small habits form large transformations, right? And student needs to realize that the big transformation that's very very much advertised, before and after, that's a bit of a sham almost. There are these very good habits that you can create that can eventually get you to where you want to go. And there's also a misconception that you tend to jump from a B to A and that there's a miracle. Actually, there's growth and improvement is something that teens don't focus on. They want an immediate better outcome. And I would be the first one to say that, immediate better outcomes are a bit Hollywoodish almost.
I agree with that. Again, you talked about the need for instant gratification, especially in today's day, and how one wants immediate results rather than seeing a process. We see so many reels on Instagram, we see so many videos of people suddenly changing everything about themselves. And the fact of it is that there's a huge journey of evolution within oneself that takes place. And sometimes we fail to acknowledge that. There's a thin line between acknowledging these challenges and then embracing them and saying that, okay, I don't think I can do this. So what would your advice be for those people who then fall prey to this trap of embracing these challenges and then thinking that they're permanent rather than trying to think of these as something that can be overcome?
Again, that's a great question. So it's a bit of a tongue twister, what I'll share with you, but awareness is the first point of change. So I would congratulate any friend who says to you that, I know if I'd spent another half an hour on this, I could have done better, because that awareness is critical. People don't even know that they don't know. And that's what makes me really nervous. Now, awareness is the first point of change. And we've already discussed habit is the sort of mountain of transformation. Okay. So between the awareness, where you should definitely support your friends, and habit building over a period of time, there's lots of up and down, right? And your question is, okay, how do they get past that period? And I would say is just stack really small challenges and don't let the emotional brain of that big transformation take over the small challenge, the small improvement, and getting better at it. So if I'm aware I didn't do that well and I got a C plus, if I remain stuck in that thought, there's a problem. If I am aware that with a little bit more effort, I can get to a B minus, that's already gold, because then the dopamine will hit as soon as you get that B plus. It's a smaller challenge. It's not as big as the A, but you build that self-confidence and that self-efficacy that you were first talking about. So short answer, self-awareness is the first point of change. Habit is the mountain of transformation. In the middle, stack up smaller challenges so that you don't get overwhelmed. You give yourself some congratulations. You build efficacy slowly, and then you take on a bigger and bigger challenge.
And that makes a lot of sense. But I would also like to ask you if you could briefly touch upon the role of teenagers as peers in assisting their own friends, helping them overcome these challenges. Because obviously there's a huge role that you have as a friend. You see a peer struggling, and this is very common. So what advice would you give to those who were bystanders to then sort of uplift themselves from the status of bystanders to actually someone who's contributing positively in the life of their peer?
No, so wonderful question, right? As teenagers, you want to sit with your friend and you want to have a good time, right?
Right.
For example, you know that your friend struggles academically and you don't. You still want to meet them and have a good time, but you may want to nudge them along and say, look, there's an exam. I would love to hang out with you. I would even just come and help you out. So, put yourself in your friend's shoes and do the thing that would help them improve rather than what you would like them to do in that moment. I would say help each other get better, right?
Yeah.
Because there's always time for entertainment. You can reward yourself with entertainment, but be clear that, that's not necessarily being supportive. Being supportive is intentionally helping somebody grow. And of course, there's just chilling and vegging and going for a movie. But that is joint entertainment. That's not necessarily supportive. So I would ask your friend, how can I support you? And so if you can just distinguish between support and entertainment, I think you would have really helped another friend out, because sometimes you get selfish about entertainment, right?
Yeah, because this is often the dilemma you undergo as a teenager, whether to go for parties and hang out or to actually help your friend who's going through some struggle. And that could not necessarily be academically, that could be in their personal life.
Yeah.
In such a volatile environment, you never know what's really going on with the person unless you sit them down and you talk to them about their issues. And I think that's also the difference between being a good friend and a great friend. And I think that this point that you very rightly mentioned can then be the stepping stone to how to deal with these problems that you face in life, how to overcome them, because it's an entire process. Like I
Yeah.
underwent myself. It took me about a solid 8 to 10 months to then find myself where I wanted to see myself. And basis the conversation I had with you, I had an opportunity to reflect on this experience
Yeah.
of mine. And I would like to think of it as failing forward.
Yep.
So after your advice, I simmered down through this knowledge of my experience to an acronym called CAPCA.
Good.
So the first one is C. C being cultivating a nature of acceptance within oneself. And like you very rightly talked about, this implies that one actually acknowledges the presence of a challenge with an open mindset, thinking of it as an opportunity rather than a challenge. And then after that, the A stands for accessing support systems, which we just talked about. Because if we talk about this concept in physics of pressure, that if a huge mass is applied on one point, then the pressure is really high. But if you distribute it equally amongst multiple points, and that could be your family, that could be your points of reference, can be your teachers, counselors, therapists, perhaps your
Yep.
friends, and really that may lighten the load on your own shoulder and it may lead you to feel a reduced burden, which could decrease your stress. Then we go on to P and G. They go hand in hand. P stands for prioritizing, and G is garnering accomplishments, like we've talked about. And one must identify and complete important tasks to not feel overwhelmed. And when
Mhm.
you keep chipping away slowly, you'll be able to build confidence in your own ability. That leads to self-efficacy, and it takes you out of the rabbit hole of self-doubt.
Yeah.
And finally, A is assurance in self, and that's sort of the final stage. It's like you've completed the game and you're on the final level, and that's the process of really evolving the self-efficacy and really having the belief that anything is possible if you do it diligently and you put your whole mind to it.
It's superb. I know, I love your framework. It can be
Thank you so
slightly
much.
different for everybody, but it
Right.
has some core components. I've spoken to you about lots of frameworks. We have one at Sai Shiko. It's called ATRA. That's my co-founder and I, Deepthi and I, were thinking very hard about what is it that will help you bounce back, fail forward, build resilience, get to your goals. And we said, that was awareness. Like I said, thinking. What do you think? I said cognitive processes, right? You using the word mindset. Can you be realistic about it? Is it temporary? Can you do something about it? There is a difference between having a catastrophic thought process that says, this is it, my life has ended. Well, your life is realistically not ended with a B. And
Right.
you can ask a couple of good questions around it. Ask yourself some questions around it. Can I actually go from B to B plus? That's it, right? So the quality of your thinking matters. Relationships matter in terms of expert advice, right? Which is why I'm saying you may have a setback and you may think you may need entertainment to get over it, but what you need is a supportive friend. You may need both, in which case you've got 2 hours on Sunday, you figure out what kind of expert help or relationship coach or whatever you need, right? And the
Yeah.
final is action, which is that once you've thought it through, you can't not action it. Often we sit down and we know the solutions and we don't action it because, again, we are hoping for a massive transformation. We are not willing to wait with the small wins, so to say. So
Yeah.
we say ATRA, yours is a phenomenal one. I would encourage everybody listening to your podcast to just sit with themselves for 15 minutes and build their own acronym, right?
Right.
What
Yeah.
is it going to take to fix it? First of all, what's the issue I'm facing? How have I been thinking about it so far? Have I been thinking about it catastrophically, or can I have some agency over it? That's a fancy way of saying control. Then who can help me? So what's the problem? How have I been thinking about it? Who can help me? Just a few questions and you have your own framework.
Wonderful. And I think if there's one thing I could add to your framework, which is sort of an afterthought after hearing myself say what I did, is that the last phase should be reflection again. Because as we talked about, this process is something that's not limited to your teenage years. It happens all the time. So you can think of it as a constant feedback loop. So I think at some times in your life, you need to keep going back to this framework, keep assessing whether there's something you can improve on. Because there's no perfect, right? It's just practicing that takes you towards perfect. So I read your blog on Angela Duckworth's research on grit at West Point, and it
Yeah.
got me thinking about times that I've had to dig deep. to get through some rough patches. And in fact, I think it would be a great idea if we both could talk about what grit really means to us, because I think grit in some manner is also subjective to each person. So
Yes.
after reading your blog, I came up with a definition of grit. I've summarized grit to be something that's a multifaceted attribute characterized by one's commitment to pursuing significant and enduring objectives. And in my definition, it talks about having a deep-seated passion for having a goal at hand. So if you're not really passionate about solving a problem, if you're not really passionate about improvement, then it's not going to take you a long way. But if you're really, really determined and you have the tenacity to persistently engage in the practice that's required to reach this level of attaining a certain peace of mind, and all while maintaining a mindset that views setbacks as opportunities for growth, then that really represents grit. Because in essence, it's the fusion of determination and effort and belief in one's ability to conquer any challenges. So if you could talk about a definition or what you think is the true meaning of grit in your own words, then it would be wonderful. And if you could also touch upon how a teenager can implement this concept to make breakthroughs.
Yeah, so just to give you context and your audience, thank you for reading the article. Of course, Angela Duckworth is a psychologist at Penn who studies grit. And she really started studying grit as an abstract concept, right? It's difficult to explain. Like you said, everybody has their own definition. And at West Point, which is sort of the equivalent of the Harvard of a military training academy, what she found was that everybody who goes there is top notch. They were valedictorians, they have great SAT scores, and then they go through the first week of what they call beastly barracks, which is a tough training initiation program, and they fall. So you came in, you were super smart, you had great SAT scores. Why did you then exit? And what was the correlation between? And what they found was in this subset was that it wasn't those who had the highest scores that lasted, but those who kept describing that being at this academy had some meaning for them. So that's why she says it's passion and perseverance for a long-term and meaningful goal. And a lot of ways, Abhivir, that happens because motivation is a complex process. Motivation for some people is just about getting the job done. For those people, there's a very big why. Why am I doing this? Why am I persevering to build a business around social and emotional learning? I'll give you an example, right? Deepti and I have had to think very hard about a business model where is different from, say, test prep. Typically, a parent would come to us and say, what is it that you actually do? How is it will I actually see results? That's not a question you ask somebody who's teaching math. Like, if you have a tutor who's effective, hopefully you'll see somebody doing better. If you have a mindset coach, there's no visibility into progress. But it has been very meaningful to continue to take the setbacks around monetizing our business model, so on and so forth, because we've had passion for what we do. And so we've persevered. Now, I have to call out that often you can't be pig-headed about a pursuit. Often you also get signals that is a course correction, right? There is a difference between perseverance and just being pig-headed about data that's coming your way. So as, people take up projects, right? It's a constant battle between staying with the project, re-strategizing if you're not getting success, right? Re-strategizing is a big part of it. And then re-persevering. And that's why, you'll see a lot of businesses, they'll say, we started off this, eventually we became that. So Angela describes grit as, passion and perseverance for long-term goals. I would say you need the passion. You definitely need the ability to come back up from a setback in your goals, whatever it is, but you also need re-strategize.
I agree completely. I think you need to have a more holistic overview of whatever challenge there is, and then look at it from an unbiased perspective too sometimes, and think of it practically. So I think adding another P in passion and perspective could be practicality as well.
Yes,
so I think
that's great. Yeah, I would. Yeah, practical about results and strategies. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. We
Thank you so much.
Passion, perseverance, and practicality. That sounds good.
Wonderful. Great. So we've made a framework of our own based on Angela Duckworth's.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And thank you so much for that. I think that's a great note to end this segment of the podcast on. And now we can switch gears and add a more fun twist, sort of come out of this deep talk.
Yeah.
So this is the rapid fire round. I'm going to ask you a couple of questions to kind of put you on the spot. And you could answer them just to help the viewers and the listeners know a bit more about you. So
certainly.
First, I'll ask you your favorite teenage memory.
Being, the team B, which is being the underdog and beating team A in a district swimming competition where everybody thought that was superb.
Wow. Yeah. All right. A book that shaped your teen years.
Oh, Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Actually, it's just called his name.
All
And
right.
he wants to perfect his flight despite sort of landing really badly. And I was a swimmer also, and if learning to dive, it really hurts. So it's a great short book. I really love that book. Anybody who wants to persevere through something, they should have a look at it. It really shaped a sense of perseverance for me. Yeah.
Now I will ask you one piece of advice that you'd give your teenage self.
Oh, don't be so harsh on yourself. Ask for help, get some expert advice, and identify good friends. I think that's just crucial. People who value you for who you are so that you're not tested to become somebody. Want to learn about something? Just ask the right people. Don't get advice from the wrong people.
One hobby that you always go to when you're feeling a bit down?
Reading.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Absolutely. It stills the mind. It gives you the content. I also like watching comedy. That just makes it a little lighthearted. There are some great Indian comedians coming up, and just laughter. Laughter is very critical. So when I'm feeling like I need some time out, I read or I watch some good comedy.
Great.
Yeah.
And finally, one song that instantly lifts your spirits. Your go-to song.
Oh, my go-to song. The ABBA song. I don't have a very good ear for music, but Super Duper Life is Gonna Find You. That one, the ABBA song. That's just fantastic.
Oh, Super Trooper.
Yeah, that's just a great
ABBA. Wonderful.
ABBA.
You can't go wrong with ABBA.
You can't go wrong with ABBA. Yeah.
Fantastic. Then you've aced this round as well. One last thing before I let you go.
Yeah.
We'll move on to this last segment called Words of Wisdom. So we want to leave with the learning for the viewers. So if you could sum it down to one mantra or one quote of yours that you'd want every teen to internalize.
That's a difficult question. Just focus on your effort. Drop the outcome, forget about the past, focus on immediate effort and sustain that effort and be patient. So focus on effort and be patient. If I could create a tagline, it would be focus on effort, forget the outcome and be patient. And that'll create the loop you need.
Great. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now it's time to wrap up this enlightening conversation. I wish it could go on longer, but I think whether you want to go into a good college, make friends, excel in sports, be an artist, musician, as a teen, I think what you've taught us is that setting and reaching goals is a very important part of growing up. Yeah. And thank you so much, Ms. Vinati, for sharing this important piece of wisdom with us. I personally feel much more enlightened now. And before we say goodbye, could you just tell our listeners how they can connect with you and connect with Sai Shiko?
Yeah, just, we have a work in progress website, but we have an Instagram, Sai Shiko, which is just SAI_Shiko. And Sai Shiko, by the way, just means try again, because it's Japanese for try again. We believe whether it's self-efficacy, whether it's self-confidence, whether it's improvement, whether it's transformation, it requires effort. Focus on effort, the outcomes will come. And be very intentional about effort. And re-strategize if it's not working. So call us, follow us, chat with us, just have another podcast, whatever you want to do. Just be open-minded about your own personal growth. That's it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time, Ms. Vinati.
Oh, I loved it. Thank you.
Awesome. So listeners, if you're seeking to light up your neural pathways, you know where to go. Until next time, this is Adhivir signing off from Teenacity Talks, where we empower you to thrive and unite. Keep it real, keep it fun, and keep those neurons firing. Peace out.